You already think you know why women over 40 want older men: status, money, stability. That's the answer almost every man gives. And it's not just incomplete, it's backwards. Because if status and money were the real reason, the wealthiest older men would have the least trouble, and some of the most financially secure men over 50 struggle with this more than men with far less. Which means something you've been assuming your whole life might actually be working against you right now without you realizing it. Somewhere between the age you are and the age you think you need to compete with, there's a mistake almost every man in this position makes, one that quietly cancels out the exact advantage he already has. And by the end of this video, you'll know whether you're already making it. Let's start with why this myth exists in the first place, because understanding where it comes from is the first step to seeing why it's wrong. The idea that women prefer younger men comes almost entirely from watching one specific age range, women in their 20s. At that age, a lot of dating psychology really is built around potential. She's asking herself who someone could become because she herself is still figuring out who she's becoming. Youth, energy, unpredictability, all of that reads as exciting when the whole picture is still open-ended. Social media makes this worse. The loudest content about dating age gaps online is built around extremes, usually younger women reacting to younger men, because that content performs well and gets pushed the most. Men absorb that as the full picture of what women want, without realizing they're only seeing one slice of one age group. Here's the problem. A woman over 40 is not asking the same question a woman in her 20s is asking. She already knows who she is. She's not looking for potential anymore. She's looking for evidence. And evidence isn't built in a few dates. It's built over years, which is precisely the thing a younger man, by definition, hasn't had time to build yet. So the myth isn't wrong because younger men have nothing going for them. It's wrong because it's answering a question that doesn't apply to this stage of a woman's life. Once you understand that shift from potential to evidence, the entire picture of what actually attracts a woman over 40 flips completely. Here's the real shift, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. At 25, attraction is largely built on imagination. A woman that age is picturing a future that doesn't exist yet, and she's filling in the blanks with hope. Youth fits that picture because youth signals room to grow, room to change, room to become something. At 40 and beyond, that entire mechanism changes. She's no longer filling in blanks with hope. She's comparing what's in front of her to years of actual data, her own relationships, the men around her, the patterns she's already lived through. She's not imagining who you could become. She's evaluating who you already are, because she has the life experience to actually read that accurately now. This is exactly where age stops being a disadvantage and becomes proof. A man in his 40s or 50s isn't a set of promises anymore. He's a completed pattern she can actually assess. How he handled failure, how he treats people with less power than him, whether his personality survived contact with real difficulty. None of that can be faked convincingly, and none of it can exist yet in someone younger, no matter how much charisma they have. This is also why the specific phrase "women over 40 want older men" misses the real mechanism. It's not that older is inherently better. It's that a woman who has stopped evaluating potential and started evaluating evidence needs something that simply takes years to produce. Age isn't the reason. Age is just the only way to generate the thing she's actually looking for. So why does this specific kind of evidence feel so powerful to her psychologically? Because by this point in her life, she has almost certainly experienced instability up close, unpredictable partners, decisions driven by ego, promises that depended on someone's mood that day. That experience recalibrates what safety actually means to her. It stops being about excitement and starts being about certainty. An older man, simply by having lived longer, has had more opportunities to be tested by real life, financial setbacks, career failures, loss, conflict, and what she's actually reading in him is how he came out the other side of those things. Calm under pressure doesn't come from confidence coaching. It comes from having survived pressure enough times that it stops being a threat. This is why stability lands so differently on a woman in her 40s than it would on someone in her 20s. Younger women often experience stability as boring because their nervous systems are still calibrated for novelty and exploration. Women who've lived through real instability experience stability as relief, sometimes even as the most attractive trait a man can have, because they know exactly what its absence costs. None of this is a performance a younger man can imitate convincingly, because stability isn't a personality trait you adopt, it's a byproduct of time. You can't rush it, and you can't fake having survived something you haven't survived yet. That's precisely why this advantage belongs to men who've actually lived the years, not to men who are simply acting the part. Here's what this actually looks like day to day, because it rarely looks dramatic. It looks like staying level during an argument instead of needing to win it. A woman who's been with reactive men notices almost immediately when a man doesn't need the last word, and she reads that as strength, not passivity. It looks like not needing constant validation on how a decision is going. Younger men, still building their identity, often check for reassurance without realizing they're doing it. An older man who's already secure in who he is doesn't need her to confirm his choices, and she notices the difference within the first few conversations. It looks like moving at a pace that isn't rushed, not slow in a passive way, but unhurried, because he's not trying to prove anything on a deadline. Decisions, plans, even conversations have room to breathe instead of urgency behind them. It looks like consistency that doesn't require effort to maintain. He shows up the same way on a good day and a hard day, and after enough repetition, she stops waiting for the other version of him to appear, because it never does. None of these things are grand gestures. They're small, repeated signals that accumulate into the exact kind of evidence we talked about earlier. And the reason they work so well is that they can't be performed convincingly for very long if they aren't actually true, which is exactly why the wrong move, the one we're covering next, does so much damage when a man tries to fake the parts he hasn't actually built yet. Here's the mistake that quietly cancels out this entire advantage, and it's more common than you'd think. When an older man starts to feel insecure about his age, whether from social media, comparison, or just internal doubt, the instinct is often to compensate by imitating younger men. Different slang, more aggressive fashion choices, chasing the same fast, high-intensity dating behavior that works for men 20 years younger. It comes from a reasonable place, wanting to stay relevant, but it does the opposite of what he intends. Here's why it backfires so badly. Everything we just covered, the stability, the calm, the lack of urgency, only works because it's authentic. The moment a man starts performing youth instead of standing in the evidence he's actually built, that authenticity disappears, and with it, the entire advantage disappears too. Worse, it reads as insecurity, and insecurity is the one thing that undoes every signal we talked about in the last section. A woman who's specifically drawn to a man's certainty about himself is going to notice immediately when that certainty gives way to trying too hard to seem like something he's not. It doesn't read as youthful, it reads as uncomfortable. This is the trap. The more a man tries to compete on the younger man's terms, the less of his own actual advantage he's using. He ends up worse off than if he'd simply done nothing, because now he's neither offering the stability that comes with his age, nor genuinely competing on youth, since that's not something age allows you to fake convincingly in the first place. So what should you actually do instead? Not imitate youth, lean into what your years have actually built. Start by dropping the urgency. Stop rushing conversations, decisions, or the pace of a relationship to prove you're still in the game. Slowing down isn't a weakness at this stage. It's the exact signal we talked about earlier, and rushing erases it instantly. Let your actual history speak instead of narrating it. Don't announce your stability. Demonstrate it in how you handle an inconvenient moment, a cancelled plan, a disagreement. The demonstration is worth more than any story you could tell about yourself. Stop competing on categories that were never yours to win. Energy levels, trend awareness, chasing novelty, these were never the terrain where your advantage lives. So competing there just highlights what you don't have instead of what you do. Invest instead in the traits that only accumulate with time. Financial discipline that's been tested over years, not performed for one date, relationships with friends and family that have actually lasted, a sense of humor that isn't anxious because it doesn't need her laughter to feel secure. power. These things cannot be shortcut, and that's exactly why they're valuable, because scarcity is part of what makes them convincing. The goal isn't to seem younger or to seem impressive. It's to simply let the years you've already lived show up clearly, without apology, and without competing with a version of yourself you no longer are and don't need to be. Now, an important distinction, because this gets confused constantly. What we're describing here is not the same thing as a woman being attracted to status or financial security, even though the two can look similar from the outside. Status-based attraction is transactional by nature. It's built on what a man can provide, and it tends to be fragile, because it depends on the resource staying available. If the money disappears, or a wealthier man appears, that kind of attraction often disappears with it. What we've been describing is structural, not transactional. It's not about what you have, it's about who you've become through having lived long enough to be tested. A man can have very little money and still carry this kind of evidence. Composure under pressure, consistency, the absence of urgency, none of which require wealth to exist. This distinction matters because a lot of older men mistakenly assume that providing more, spending more, offering more is how you compete in this category. It isn't. In fact, over-providing early often reads as compensating for something, which circles right back to the insecurity we covered a few sections ago. The real advantage isn't purchasable, and it isn't transferable. It's something you either have because you've genuinely lived it, or you don't yet. No matter what's in your bank account. That's exactly why it can't be shortcut by men chasing status instead of doing the actual internal work that produces real stability over time. Here's the part that should genuinely change how you think about your own timeline. Because this advantage isn't fixed, it compounds. Every year you spend actually living with consistency, handling difficulty without falling apart, building relationships that last, adds more evidence to the pattern a woman over 40 is specifically looking for. Unlike youth, which is a resource that only shrinks over time, this kind of stability only grows the longer you actually practice it. This means the clock most men are afraid of is not actually working against them here. If you spend the next 5 years building genuine consistency instead of anxiously trying to look younger, you're not losing ground. You're accumulating exactly the currency that matters most in this specific dynamic. Most men never discover this because they give up on themselves the moment they start comparing their age to a 25-year-old's, instead of comparing their pattern of behavior to who they were 5 years ago. That comparison is the wrong one. The right comparison is whether you are more solid, more consistent, and less reactive than you used to be. Because that trajectory is what actually keeps compounding in your favor as the years pass. The men who understand this stop panicking about age entirely because they realize their advantage isn't threatened by time, it's built by it. And once you stop treating the years as a countdown and start treating them as the raw material of exactly what she's looking for, everything about how you carry yourself changes. So here's the actual takeaway. Women over 40 were never choosing older men because of the number on a birth certificate. They were choosing evidence, calm, consistency, a man who has already been tested by real life and came out steady on the other side. That evidence only exists because of the years, not despite them. If you've been quietly worried that getting older was working against you, ask yourself honestly which mistake we covered you might actually be making right now. The one where you try to compete on younger men's terms instead of standing fully in what your years have already built. Stop performing youth. Start demonstrating the pattern only time could have built in the first place. If this changed how you think about your own timeline, subscribe for more of this, the real psychology behind attraction that most men never get explained to them clearly.